Chapter 47. Knock, knock, who's there? Are you awake, Graham? Asked Bouncer to the barn as a whole. Yes, Bouncer, I am awake. It's gone 8 o'clock, you know, he replied. Oh, okay, sorry about that. I was so tired, and it was so nice to be back in our barn again. I dreamt like a baby, said Bouncer. I'm glad you caught up on some sleep, Bouncer. Another day and my phase shifter should be fully deep charged. Woohoo! So what do we do for now then? Asked Bouncer. I don't know. Well, we could go for a spin around the farm, you know, like the old times, pondered Graham out loud. That is a terrific idea, said Bouncer as his wheels span up to tear off. Last one to the mountain top is a rotten egg. At that precise moment there was a knock at Farmer's door. As Bouncer flew out of the barn, followed closely by Graham, Barnaby turned to just in time to see the two vehicles shoot off. A casual glance at his tracker screen told him all he needed to know. He had found them, and now it was his turn to ask the questions. Hello, who's there? Asked Farmer to the partly open door. Ah, replied Barnaby, turning back to face Farmer. My name is Barnaby. I'd like to talk to you about those two vehicles. During their catch-up with Farmer, Graham and Bouncer had told him all about Barnaby. The trouble was they certainly hadn't left Farmer in the position where they thought he would turn up here. But here he is. Now, being a farmer, Farmer was great at not necessarily telling the whole truth right at any one time. You know when someone is pulling your leg but they are doing it so well you actually think they are being sincere, just because they have a superb poker face. Well, this is the face that Barnaby saw as Farmer asked. Oh, okay, what would you like to know? Thinking he was getting his own way, Barnaby continued, but in reality it was Farmer that had him just where he wanted. He was stitching Barnaby up as tight as drum, in a mess of misunderstanding and misinterpretation that would result in a very frustrated Barnaby driving off in about 8 minutes with a grand total of 0 information about what were fast becoming his arch-enemies. Meanwhile they, the arch-enemies, were tearing around the mountainside in blissful ignorance. Racing from bank to berm and valley to rise, pothole to jump and back. In fact, they were tearing around so much that neither were aware that in one very fortuitous moment the tracker Barnaby had stuck to Graham would bounce into the air. As Graham bounced past Bouncer and Bouncer past Graham, one of the many potholes would jar Graham's chassis just enough for the little tracker to become unstuck. As soon as it became free to move of its own accord, it was only a matter of time until it found something to fly into, or perhaps something found it. Either way, the first of many things was Graham's back left tire. The rapidly spinning tire would send the tracker on a course that in about 4 seconds would see it in precisely the same place as one of Bouncer's very grippy, also very quickly spinning tires. This grand and completely random meeting or tire and tracker would result in the tiny tracker being flicked about half a mile into the sky. In most instances this would not be an issue, per se, as the tracker was light and built robustly. However, in this particular instance the parabolic course on which it was sent would, once it had reached its zenith, see the tracker fall back to earth. The various parameters such as air and wind resistance, and gravity of course would all see fit to effect minute changes on the eventual course of the devilish little tracker. So, as it descended on its wonderfully, randomly affected course, instead of simply landing on the ground in some arbitrary location, it would now be destined to coincide with a light aircraft that had literally just taken off from a local airfield. For some reason Roger the pilot had decided to repeat his pre-flight checks just one more time. And in doing so, instead of taking off 10 minutes ago, it was now he was slowly climbing into the air. It was right at this moment a curious but questionable set of events had ultimately seen fit to place Roger, his Cessna and the small but wicked tracker on the minor collision course they all now found themselves. In the great history of mid-air collisions this one would have to be the least terrible by any measure. No one would crash, no one would be hurt. Not a single one of the affected parties would know anything of it, so subtle it would be. There would be only one injured party, Barnaby, and Barnaby was at this very moment sat in his car after talking to Farmer. Now, since Barnaby had seen fit to use a magnetic tracker, there was only one possible outcome, and as you have probably guessed, the tracker became affixed to the light aircraft. From that moment, any advantage Barnaby had had was now little more than a footnote to a bad day. As the little plane flew off to the horizon, Barnaby, slightly fuming after his chat with the farmer, took solace in the ping, ping, ping on the tracker. Ah, he said to himself, you've taken to the sky once more. Well, two can play at that game. As Barnaby started to drive to the nearest airfield to try and hire a mode of transport, the boys were returning to their barn for an afternoon snooze, just like the good old days.